So it's been a little over an hour and a half since I got back from seeing It Chapter 2 in theaters. This movie officially comes out tomorrow, but I got to see it a bit early. Ultimately, I was disappointed with this movie. It's not a bad movie. I didn't hate it, nor did I really dislike it, but it's not as good as the first one. The first movie, the 2017 It film, that is far superior to this sequel in virtually every way. So there's a few basic mistakes that were made with the making of this movie, and I'm going to delve into what those things are. First and foremost, I like the cast of the movie. The cast works, but the problem is the characters aren't developed as well in their adult counterparts compared to when they were kids. And the main reason for that is what I believe to be this movie's biggest failing, which are these flashback sequences that they put in this movie. The flashback sequences drag the movie out far longer than it needs to be. This movie is close to a 3-hour runtime, and the flashback sequences slow down the pacing of the film, of the main story, so much to the point where the movie gets to be a little bit too slow consistently throughout its runtime. And there's still a lot of scenes with the adult characters that are entertaining, but unfortunately, because they keep cutting back to these flashback sequences for when they were kids, which goes back to the original cast of the first film, the movie doesn't spend as much time with the adult characters as it should. And that's a big problem with this movie. Another big problem with It Chapter 2 is the lack of Pennywise. Pennywise isn't really in the movie that much. He's only in there for a few select scenes. When you do see him, it's effective, but a lot of the scares and a lot of what you actually see were already shown in the first movie, so it's not as effective here as it was the first time around. In fact, some of the scares are actually repeated from the first movie, just in different variations, and that's an issue. Another problem with It Chapter 2 is the ending. Without going into any spoiler territory, the ending just did not feel conclusive and satisfying the way it should have. And the main issue with that is the movie really skims over Pennywise's origin, and it really doesn't try and explain where he came from. So when it comes time for the movie to gear up for this final confrontation between Pennywise and the older versions of the Losers Club from the first film, I was really thrown off because there was quite a bit of reference to the mythology from the original Stephen King novel, but the movie doesn't really explain it well for it to really connect to the audience in any profound way. I think another issue is that the adult characters are really written the same way as the children, and in certain scenes that does work. I think the character that works best with that style of writing is the Richie character, played by Bill Hader, who is easily the best part of this movie. But it doesn't really feel like the characters really grew up and actually matured on a mental level in the 27-year gap between this movie and the last one. A lot of them act exactly the same as they did when they were kids, and it's just not as realistic or believable as it should have and could have been. Outside of these drawbacks, the movie is shot very well. The sequences in which they bring back the child actors is great, simply because those actors work so well together and they have a chemistry on screen, which is actually another problem with the adult characters. It just doesn't feel like they really have as strong a chemistry as the children did from the first film. But for the most part, the actors do a good job. It's shot very well. There's quite a bit of horror imagery in this that really works, but it's not really as much of a horror film compared to other horror properties that are out there. Not that the movie doesn't have frightening scenes, it certainly does, but it's not as effective as, say, something like The Haunting of Hill House, which is on Netflix. If anything, I would say the comedy aspect of the movie works more than the horror side of it does. Had they actually written Pennywise to be in the movie a little bit more than he turned out to be, and had they actually written those scenes to be different from what you got in the first film, I think this would have turned out to be a far better movie. And also if they removed the flashback sequences. I was okay with the first two flashback sequences, but then after the third and the fourth and the fifth, it just became redundant. It became so bad actually that I actually lost count of how many flashback sequences are in this movie. And I'm not really sure why the choice was made to insert those scenes in the movie, because if they were really important, then why weren't they just in the first film where they belong? And another issue with the movie is its structure, which has a very similar structure to the first film, so much so that it does once again get boring in certain parts. And it's a real shame ultimately that this movie turned out the way it did. Once again, it's not bad, but it could have been far better than what it turned out to be. It's still a good time for anyone who is interested in this. I think they will enjoy themselves, especially if you like the first film. But this definitely was not what I expected going into it. And ultimately, I thought that Andy Muschietti, who directed the first film and this one, was going to churn out something better than this. So that's my thoughts on It Chapter 2. I suppose the next movie that I cover will be the Joker film. That's been getting a lot of raving reviews, and that movie does look fantastic. So I'm looking forward to seeing that when it releases in early October.